It's the Joe Show, starring Joe, doing all sorts of Joe things. Not your average Joe, and also he can walk.
Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Kia ora, Bolt fam. It's the director. Chargers fans, I know it's been a rough go of it for a couple of weeks now, right? Week 7 left some things to be desired. Going into week 8, there was high expectations on the bye week. Those didn't happen. But you know what? It's time to break out of those bye week blues because it's Falcons week, baby. The Chargers will be traveling to the Atlanta Falcons for their week 9 matchup. Hoping to go 5-3 in this one. Again, I know times are tough, okay? But this is still a team led by Justin freaking Herbert. A 4-3 team that still has the whole season in front of them and does include still some star power on the roster. Now, we are down bad at wide receiver, okay? That's one of the things that we were really hoping to see adjusted during the bye week period. The trade deadline at that same time as well, but that just didn't happen. But that doesn't mean the Chargers don't have guys out there that can make a difference, especially versus this particular team who is very much so struggling to stay healthy in their secondary. So we're going to go through the ins and outs of this matchup, see what the Chargers can do to maybe provide themselves a surviving win here to give themselves more time to heal up, get more wide receivers back on the roster, and hopefully get ready for the Kansas City Chiefs in week 11, which is coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Got to get healthy, got to make it out with some wins. Do the Chargers have enough in the tank to provide that kind of time in this one? We'll have to wait and see. Now, before we do get started, guys, shout out to our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. We should have a good one this week, dudes. I did go through and pick a couple of players that I am very high on in terms of their matchups. ETN, Rodgers, Mostert, and Mariota. Now, in terms of Mariota, I get it. We don't want to pick a player that's going against the Chargers, but the Chargers kind of rough versus mobile quarterbacks. We're going to take the higher in terms of those rushing yards. Use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100 and get in on the action. Good luck to everybody out there. Be sure to post your picks in the comments section below. Before we do get started, guys, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. The small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps out a lot. Let's get into this one. Lights, camera, action. The Chargers at Atlanta Falcons, Week 9 game preview. Let's jump right into it, dudes, like we always do with the Week 9 injury report. Now, this injury report's becoming what of a horror movie experience every single week, and hopefully things start trending in a better direction in the weeks to come. But as of right now, we do have some bad news, and we also do have some good news. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and refresh this just to see if they have posted the new ones, and haha, they have. We might be able to provide some clarity here after the update. Now, Keenan Allen's not going to be playing this game. That's a huge bummer. That's one of the biggest reasons why we're like, dudes, we got to go out there and get a wide receiver. Our receivers, even with Keenan Allen returning, a little bit shaky with that hamstring. And lo and behold, that gamble to not go get somebody banking on the Keenan Allen return did kind of bite us in the butt. So no Keenan Allen this week. DeAndre Carter did limited practice. I'm just learning this now. Limited practice with an illness. He's questionable for Sunday's matchup. Man, that would be crazy. I just listened to the press conference, too. I don't remember that being brought up, but hopefully he's ready to go on Sunday. Again, illnesses, those, again, are really shaky. Not very long-term, but, man, we really need DeAndre Carter on Sunday. Austin Eckler on and off the injury report, as far as I'm seeing. Limited with an abdomen issue. He was full on Friday. I think he'll be good to go. Dustin Hopkins out. A couple other notable names here. Joshua Palmer, concussion. He's been practicing in full all week. He will be active this game, and that's probably the most important wide receiver on the roster right now to have on the field. Donald Parham, this one really sucks, man. He was finally healthy after clearing concussion protocol and then jumped right back on the injury report with a hamstring issue. That sucks. That sucks. He's been listed as out. Chris Rumph is out. Jerry Tillery is out. Mike Williams, of course, is out. Chargers are down bad this week. But I think it's now time to take a look at the Atlanta Falcons side of the injury report as well, just to kind of see what we're working with. We're going to be, with the lack of weapons on offense in terms of our receivers, I think the Atlanta Falcons are also going to see their share of issues in terms of coverage with the kind of health issues that they're having in their secondary. Now, of course, AJ Terrell, just listed as out, will not be out there for the Falcons. And AJ Terrell, one of the better cornerbacks in the league, that's going to be a huge relief to a guy like Josh Palmer, who's going to be thrusted into the Chargers wide receiver 1 position. Of course, we don't want to see anybody out. We don't wish injury upon any player in the NFL, but that is something of note. They are without AJ Terrell, and they are already without Casey Hayward, the former Charger, who was put on IR, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So that secondary definitely down bad right now. Of course, they're also going to be missing Elijah Wilkinson, their guard, and then everybody else looks like they should be fine. So that is your injury report for Week 9. Chargers fans, hang in there, man. I get it, dudes. I've been a Chargers fan long enough to know what the injury bug is. The curse of the Chargers' health. It sucks, man. Every once in a while, we'll see a season where it's especially tough. Hang in there, man. Every once in a while, a season like last season also comes around where the team does remain more healthy than not. So let's hope the Chargers have enough in the tank to push their way through this game, buy themselves a little bit more time to get healthy. So with that, let's jump into some of the talking points of this game, what to look for, what to watch out for, some of the matchups and things to take advantage of versus the Falcons to hopefully go out there and get that win. Let's start things off with this segment, Protect the Eck. Now, again, Austin Ekeler, he bounced on and off the injury report with an abdomen issue, okay? But that doesn't mean, just because he's off the injury report doesn't mean that there isn't still something there, some risk. And with a guy like Austin Ekeler, the last standing star of the Chargers offense in terms of weapons for Justin Herbert, we've got to find a way to protect this guy. And the best way that you can do that is with contributions from your backup running backs. Of course, we're talking about Sony Michel and Isaiah Spiller. Now, Sony Michel, last couple of weeks, definitely has looked up and down on the ground. This season, he's averaged somewhere around like 2.5 yards per carry. That is not good enough. So what I'm hoping that the Chargers try to utilize this week is a little bit more of Isaiah Spiller. Of course, he only got 1 carry in Week 7. It went for negative yards as it got blown up at the line of scrimmage. But still, I want to see what Isaiah Spiller has to offer. Until we get Joshua Kelly back, we're putting a lot on Austin Ekeler to carry this team, especially on the ground. The Atlanta Falcons, they're okay versus the run game, but it's not something I want to put all on Austin Ekeler, at least right now, especially with how much health concerns that we're having all over the roster. So if I'm Joe Lombardi and if I'm this team, if we're going to be trying to run it in any sort of capacity that's going to help open up that air attack just a little bit, we've got to get Isaiah Spiller involved. And remember, Isaiah Spiller coming into this season, considered a steal in the NFL draft, but also does complement Austin Ekeler quite well. Very good runner between the tackles. Doesn't possess that huge speed, but he does possess that pass-catching ability that would provide some relief for Austin Ekeler if the Chargers still need to lean on that. So I'm pretty big on Austin Ekeler this week, the individual. I think he's going to get plenty of work. I think he should be fine in terms of like fantasy football and keeping the Chargers in it. But at the same time, we need to provide that relief, and I want to see quality backup play. Right now, maybe Sony Michel is the best back to provide that on the roster, but we just don't know about Isaiah Spiller yet. Coach Staley did say he had a solid week of practice. We're just going to have to see if that translates into game day. So protect Austin Ekeler. Make sure you feature him in this offense, but give him the relief that's needed with a quality backup if possible. Next up, let's talk about the, by the way, there is your Isaiah Spiller, hoping to see him get some action. Let's talk a little bit about the Atlanta Falcons secondary situation. Now, like we mentioned in the injury report, Casey Hayward has been listed on IR. He will not be suiting up. AJ Terrell likely out with a hamstring. And this, he has been listed out with a hamstring. And this is a big issue for the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons, if anything, in terms of their passing D, have been extremely suspect all season. As a matter of fact, I think they are the worst passing defense in the entire NFL. And now they're missing quite a few stars on top of that. This is pretty big for the Chargers, who, again, your yin and yang are very banged up at the wide receiver position. What are we going to see? Are we going to see a draw in terms of that matchup? Are we going to see, two forces of backups meet head to head? I think in terms of what the Chargers are working with, they do have a better matchup in terms of Josh Palmer versus their backups. Again, the Atlanta Falcons, they have surrendered a staggering 306 passing yards per game in 2022. Now, I get it. I'm nervous about Josh Palmer being the wide receiver one. I think his upside does exist, and he's going to be a solid player for the Chargers going forward. But this is a lot to put on to him as an individual so early in his career. Do I think he's up for the task? I do. But I think this situation does provide some relief to his responsibilities this week. The absolute best way to attack Atlanta is going to be through the air. I think Josh Palmer is going to be the obvious, guy to go to in terms of matching up versus their banged up secondary. Without A.J. Terrell and Casey Hayward, this is the way you're going to have to contend versus Atlanta. And it's going to be one that the Chargers are going to have to heavily utilize, heavily lean on if your name is Joe Lombardi. You cannot fall behind in this game. We're going to get more into that in just a second. You cannot fall behind. Use that air attack. Use the mismatch as much as possible to your advantage. Try and stay ahead as best you can, because that is legitimately your best shot at making it out of this one. Now, how are the Chargers going to take advantage of this? Well, let's talk a little bit about this segment. Carter with the G7. Now, an extremely important aspect to this game, I feel, is going to be freeing up our stars underneath. And what that means, we've talked about Austin Eckler, we've talked about Josh Palmer. Both of those guys, again, Eckler is decently fast, but he's more utilized underneath, again, as a receiving back. He's a running back. He's going to be trying to find space on the outside, over the middle. You can utilize him in the slot as a receiver as much as you want as well. I think he's very talented in that aspect, but he's mainly going to be targeted underneath. And that's the kind of, safety valve that a Justin Herbert's especially going to need this week. But I also would like to see guys like, Carter and G7, Gerald Everett get involved a little bit more in order to free these guys up. In order to free up space underneath, you're going to have to get the defense to respect you in the intermediate and deep part of the field in some way, shape, or form. And we don't have the best speed options on the team right now, unfortunately. That's the best way to attack it. We've seen it with the Miami Dolphins, with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You can't really play close to the line of scrimmage against that team because they got the speed just to get away from you, and that's big playability you just cannot risk. The Chargers really don't have that on the roster right now, maybe outside of DeAndre Carter a little bit. But they still have the option to free things up underneath in some way with the aggressiveness in terms of Joe Lombardi trying to get the ball out deep, providing the kind of, creative play calling to really stretch the field out just a little bit. You don't have to do it a tremendous amount versus the Falcons, but you got to do it in some way, shape, or form. And I feel like Gerald Everett is going to be a big factor in this one in terms of that, including, DeAndre Carter as well. Gerald Everett, he's going to have to attack the seams, right? He's going to have use his speed and his yak ability to help the Chargers in terms of freeing up space over the middle. Then you're talking about a little bit of DeAndre Carter on the outside. He should see plenty of action too, right? Use him to stretch the field. He's not the fastest wide receiver, but he's the fastest one that we got right now. Utilize that strength and that trait to help your stars underneath. You really need to feature your stars this week, and they're going to need room to operate. Now, these guys individually should contribute plenty, but use them as space openers more often than not. Everett can create space for Eckler, and Carter can create space for Palmer. I feel like if you can lean in on that, good things should happen. You should open up more opportunities for yourself on offense. We can't rule out the occasional, let's chuck it up to Gerald Everett in the red zone. He's shown a lot of potential in the red zone, especially just underneath the red zone, right? It's really tough to pass into the end zone. But Gerald Everett, we've seen a couple of plays this season where you pass it, 10 yards away from the end zone. He's able to use that yak ability to get in there and score. And then equally can be said as DeAndre Carter. Utilize that speed. If you can get behind them, if that secondary really is down bad, try and get behind him as often as you can. And again, that will in turn free up a little bit of space underneath. So we got to utilize these weapons as best we can. That's what we have available. I think Gerald Everett should have a solid day, but I do want to see DeAndre Carter utilize as much as possible in terms of stretching the field. Next up, let's talk a little bit about in the palm of our hands. Josh Palmer, again, the wide receiver one for the Chargers going into this week. And again, I do think he's up to the task, and he is very much so fortunate that he's going into this particular situation in which the Atlanta Falcons, they're not going to have A.J. Terrell or Casey Hayward. We saw so much potential out of Josh Palmer. You guys remember the preseason? Josh Palmer was pretty much every week in, week out, that kind of highlight guy. Him and DeAndre Carter. And I feel like it's time to live up to it this week, right? This is the ultimate opportunity in terms of let's take all of that potential and all the things that we saw in the offseason and put it to the test as your featured guy in week 9. Now I'm going to hear some people say, well, with that director, that was up against second and third stringers. This situation is pretty similar. This situation is very similar, as a matter of fact. He's going up against a lot of backups, a lot of depth pieces of the Atlanta Falcons secondary. And if we see anything reminiscent of the preseason, Palmer should have a pretty monster day. And I'm not going to say monster in terms of like, wow, he's going to go 140 yards and 2 touchdowns. But I think the potential is there for Carter to maybe reach his, or I should say Palmer to reach maybe, would this be his first 100-yard game? Would this be his first, multiple touchdown game? I think one or the other is absolutely possible. But if you're Joe Lombardi and your number one wide receiver is Josh Palmer, you have to make sure to utilize him properly. I would say trust him in the same way you trust Keenan Allen. I believe that we've seen a lot of plays this year where Josh Palmer does get open, does get free, maybe does get overthrown by Justin Herbert, especially when Herbert was really battling those rib injuries. But at the same time, I feel like that same skill set kind of exists in Josh Palmer. We need to trust him in that same way. Convert third downs. Put your guys in good situations in terms of trying to get yards on every single play. Use the playability of Eckler and Palmer. Let them create plays if you have to, but try to get these guys some space to operate. And I do feel like Josh Palmer is in for a pretty solid week. Again, I'll spitball with you guys. I'll say that Josh Palmer maybe doesn't crack 100 yards. Maybe we'll say like 87 yards. But I do think he puts up a score this week because the Chargers are really going to need to lean on him. But who knows? With how suspect the secondary is this week, we may see a game over 100 yards for Josh Palmer in Week 9. Next up, this segment is called the Duck Bowl 2. We did talk a little bit about this in the opener. Justin Herbert versus Marcus Mariota, the two former Oregon Ducks. These guys are going back again head-to-head. And if you guys don't remember, the Chargers did play the Vegas Raiders a couple of seasons back where Marcus Mariota was the backup, and Derek Carr ended up going down, in which we saw the Marcus Mariota take over. It was a pretty entertaining game, man, and one that was very fun, I'm sure, for Oregon Duck fans. Now it's time to do it again. He's going to face him this time with the Atlanta Falcons, and it's going to be an interesting challenge, this Marcus Mariota. On one hand, Mariota has not been the most consistent in terms of his passing, right? And this is something I'm sure the Atlanta Falcons were expecting when they replaced Matt Ryan with him. They're going to have to really shift what you do on offense, kind of reminiscent of what the Baltimore Ravens did when they moved on from Joe Flacco and ended up giving the offense to Lamar Jackson. Of course, that upside doesn't exist for Marcus Mariota, but you can utilize him in a lot of similar ways, right? The passing is not going to be very consistent. It does seem like he's opening him up more and trusting Kyle Pitts, which is going to be very big for that team going forward. But Drake London continues to be underutilized. The biggest thing this team's got going for him with this quarterback and Marcus Mariota, unfortunately, is a weakness of the Chargers, and that is his mobility. The Chargers have struggled mightily versus mobile quarterbacks in the past, maybe even this season. I expect it to continue here in Week 9, unfortunately. Mariota is the kind of guy that's not afraid to pick up yards with his feet. The Chargers have been playing a bit soft in terms of their coverage. I feel like maybe Brandon Staley could find a way to try and contain Marcus Mariota. Maybe give, Kenneth Murray a bit of assignment in terms of utilizing him as a spy, keeping that, edge contained. Find a way to keep him in the pocket. But more likely than not, I feel like the Chargers are going to struggle in this one in containing Marcus Mariota. And I do think that is one part of the running game that the Chargers have to be very weary of this week. And again, that's why it makes it so much more important that the Chargers try and stay ahead in terms of the score. If Mariota can start running all over the place, if Cordell Patterson can start running all over the place, things can get out of hand pretty quick. So hopefully the Chargers find a way to contain him, but I do expect Marcus Mariota to be an issue for the Chargers defense in terms of containing his mobility. Speaking of Cordell Patterson, he should be back this week. I know he was on IR for a while or something like that. He was out with something. It might have been a hamstring injury, but I do think I've heard that he is going to be returning versus the Chargers here in Week 9. And again, this is going to be a problem for LA. Patterson's a hell of a football player, both as a runner and a receiver, kind of the bigger version of Austin Eckler. And the issue here is that the Chargers' run defense has not improved as much as we had hoped over this offseason. We brought in Sebastian Joseph-Day, Austin Johnson. Sure, it's gotten better. It really has. Last season was horrible. This season's been bad, but it did get a little bit better, but not as much as we had hoped. And if Patterson is truly back, which I do believe he is, he could see a big day on the ground. And with how the Chargers struggle versus mobile quarterbacks, it adds that extra layer to the threat of Cordell Patterson. Does that make sense? This duo can really cause issues for the Bolts, especially if we fall behind early. The Chargers, again, if they bite on the quarterback run and it's a handoff, if it's an option play, Cordell Patterson could be gone. And the same thing can be said for Marcus Mariota. This issue is definitely one that is going to be the biggest threat to the Chargers this week. It's going to be the Atlanta Falcons rushing attack. And they do have that combo that the Chargers especially do struggle versus in that mobile quarterback and a very good starting running back. You know what? And even if Cordarrelle Patterson is limited, right? He's coming off of an injury. If they call into their backup, don't underestimate Tyler Algier either. You guys remember his name? We talked a lot about him during the draft process. He was one of the guys I was pretty high on. And guess what? He's a beast. He's very, very good. And the Chargers definitely need to be careful in terms of defending the run. Whoever it may be, Patterson or Algier, I do feel like that Marcus Mariota effect is going to make that extremely, or that much more complicated for the Chargers in this matchup. So watch out for the running attack. I know that's what the Falcons are going to definitely be wanting to utilize this week pretty heavily. Lastly, all eyes on the Joe Show. Do you guys like that opener? Well, we're back, man. Joe Lombardi is back after the bye week, and I feel like, especially in this week versus the Falcons, versus a very obvious weakness of that secondary, even, with all the issues we're having on offense right now, I think the biggest factor of this game is going to be how Joe Lombardi responds to the horrific Week 7 performance. This team is down bad, and his options for weapons are very limited. He's going to need to utilize every player to their strengths here in Week 9, right? Lombardi very much so does favor the short passing attack. Of course, we've seen this the entire season. We've seen it maybe a bit more effective in seasons past, but, it hasn't been working out very well this season. And that if he wants to continue doing that, that's fine with me. There's a way to find success in that, but he's got to find a way to create space for his guys. And this is something we talked about with Everett and DeAndre Carter. As of right now, Atlanta, they have no reason to back off in terms of their coverage, right? They can play right up to the line of scrimmage if they wanted to, because we lack playmakers and speed. And they know that Joe Lombardi is going to want to toss it underneath, dink and dunk. But if Lombardi can find a way to truly utilize the talents and traits of his guys and stretch that defense, I feel like we got a shot versus this banged-up secondary. And if there's any week to take that brave shot to draw something up, to get DeAndre Carter open, to get Gerald Everett open, in the intermediate or deep part of the field, do it this week. This is your best shot to try and trend something, to try and create something you can use going forward. Because this dink and dunk, it's going to be too predictable going forward. It is going to be a failure for the Chargers in terms of this offensive scheme going forward if we do not adjust. And that's on Joe Lombardi for the most part. Everett is fast and strong. Feature him over the middle. Carter is our best speed option. Stretch the field. Find a way to get these guys open. Find a way to get the ball into the hands of Austin Ekeler, Josh Palmer, but most importantly, create space for them. Joe's play calling this year, it's been extremely poor, outside of maybe a couple of games, right? And he may have survived the bye week, but I'd still very much so say his job is on the line. And another poor performance, especially versus an opponent like this, it could spell pretty bad news for Joe Lombardi going forward. So with that, guys, here's my score prediction for this game. The Los Angeles Chargers versus the Atlanta Falcons. I've got the Chargers at 24, the Atlanta Falcons at 28. This is the first time this season that I'm predicting a loss, but it's definitely not set in stone. Okay, again, it's within one score. This is going to be one of those games where you see the Chargers either figure it out or fall apart. And with how suspect the Falcons, passing D is, the Chargers may be able to find a way to keep ahead of Atlanta. Okay? But a lot depends on Joe Lombardi. Okay, it depends on how Joe Lombardi adjusts to his crisis at wide receiver, especially. If he's able to use his weapons properly, featuring Everett and Carter to free up our guys underneath, then sure, there's a shot. I think we can even use, other pieces that we have on the roster a little bit deeper, like Joe Reed, right, in those trick plays and stuff like that, to try and get things going. But you got to take advantage of that banged-up secondary. I almost hate to say it. Ultimately, though, I did have to give the edge to the Atlanta Falcons and their rushing attack, especially. Between Patterson and Mariota and Algier, I think the Bolts are going to have their hands full. They're going to have a tough time with this one, especially if they fall behind early. That's the biggest thing that you cannot do. You got to drive down the field. You got to put up points, man. If you start falling behind, the Falcons are going to have no reason to let up on that running attack. They're going to have to figure that one out this week, man. But they do have a shot here, okay? The Bolts still have a shot. They'll need to play one of the cleaner games that they have so far this season. But that passing D of the Atlanta Falcons, that's your way into a win this week. Hopefully Joe Lombardi and the coaching and the players and everybody's ready to utilize that. Well, guys, this has been The Director. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section below on how the Chargers can attack the Atlanta Falcons, how the Chargers should handle the wide receiver situation, and ultimately what your score prediction is going to be here for Week 9. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Hit us up with a like and sub on your way out if you did enjoy this content. We'll see you next time. And as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Watch out for Cordero Patterson, man. Don't let Marcus Mariota run away with that duo.